on average, were more successful than Asian Americans up until the 1950s and 60s when the United States started pushing the model minority myth. If you look at census data from the 1940s, black people were earning significantly more than Asian people. But the United States was engaging in military actions in Asia under the guise of bringing democracy and fighting against communism when the rest of the world started to wonder, with the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and Jim Crow, what business did the United States have being in another continent telling other countries how to operate when they treat their own people so poorly? That's when the United States started to say, no, Asians are doing great. They work hard, they're quiet, they don't protest, and they are lifting themselves up by their bootstraps out of poverty. The problem is black people who are protesting. And opportunities that were previously withheld from both black and Asian people started being provided to Asian people and continued to be withheld from black people. Then in 1964, when the Civil Rights Amendment finally passed and black people were supposed to receive equitable access to those opportunities, in 1965, the United States opened the door to Asian immigration with the Hart-Celler Act and continued giving those opportunities to Asian people. Very importantly, the ability and resources to open, own, and operate businesses in black neighborhoods, which effectively deprived black people of the ability to invest in their own neighborhoods. Now, in case you're still thinking, no, it really is about emphasis on education, by the 1980s, an Asian American without a high school diploma was earning about the same as a white person without a high school diploma, and both were earning significantly more than a black person without a high school diploma. So that has nothing to do with educational attainment and everything to do with the opportunities provided. But also that you inserted yourself in a conversation between two Asian Americans to weaponize Asian American identity against black people is just gross.
Blacks and Asians don't get along. That's what you've been taught. Here's one reason why. In 1955, 5 Asian countries held a conference of African and Asian nations. They gathered representatives of 29 former Western colonies in Bandung, Indonesia. These countries all shared similar concerns. Now self-governed, they saw Western powers doing their best to sideline them on the international stage. They knew former colonizers would never treat them as equal partners. They had to build their own alliances and power. The Bandung Conference resulted in a declaration of economic and cultural cooperation, self-determination, and peaceful coexistence among participating nations. They refused to play into the Cold War and other Western power struggles, instead focusing on their own growth. It worked for a while. The US, wanting to cultivate a reputation for freedom, stayed largely uninvolved. Asian and African nations began rebuilding their industries suppressed under colonial rule. But then, as the Cold War heightened, Russia declared an anti-colonial stance, and JFK feared that the rebellious post-colonial leaders that had defied Europe would align with the USSR. Through direct CIA interference and political pressure, the US began to destabilize governments, installing leaders friendly to US military and economic goals. They also disseminated propaganda that painted regimes unaligned with the US as backwards, corrupt, and untrustworthy allies. 2 more Bandung conferences were held in 2005 and 2015. In them, Asian and African nations continued to develop stronger financial ties, including the declaration of a new Asian-African strategic partnership. And Western governments and companies continue to exert political, financial, and propaganda pressure on countries across post-colonial Asia and Africa.
Chinese Americans, or I would use the Asian. Because if you say Asian Americans, we don't necessarily include India, even though India is part of Asia. So most of the time we say Asian Americans, we mean the Far East, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Koreans, the Vietnamese, such people, right? So when I say Asian, I mean the Far East. Now they came up front and they discovered one thing. This is particularly after, I think this is particularly after all the days before the Hyundai battery factory incident, right? The incident when the white woman was able to report these individuals who were Koreans working in Hyundai, the car factory, right? So they were reported and they were almost deported. Back later, the US begged them to stay and they refused, right? I think they refused because of the shame. You see, you can't buy shame and you can't buy it out. Once someone has been ashamed, there is no amount of money that can wipe it off. You go ahead and speak bad about people. You speak bad things about them. And then you later want to become their friends. Or you want to pay them. Or you want to cook them good food. Or invite them to your house. That will not wipe away your sins. It won't. The person who can wipe your sin is God. Seek Him. So, that is the same thing that is happening to the the Asian Americans, you know, these Asian Americans are likened to an example, the fictional person I just told you about. They go ahead, they insult you, and then they want to dine with you to make you forget. That's not right, and it's not true, right? So the Asian Americans are now coming up front, and they're recognizing that they have a common struggle with black people, and they have a common, I don't want to name it an enemy, let me name it a challenge and a struggle. So I want us to listen to them, give their narration and their perspectives about this, and then I shall get back by the end of the video, of course, where we shall also have a deep critical analysis. Let's dive in.
Question. This actually is a serious question. Why don't you like us black people? Non-American Asians always gave me the cold shoulder. American Asians were cool and I often hang out with them. Are they just not used to us?
Partially. Sad
to say, but I know that there's anti-blackness very much so in a lot of Asian American communities. And obviously, unfortunately, anti-blackness is global. And I think like
it's a very long historical answer.
Yeah.
Some of it has to do with not being used to it. Okay, so colonization happened throughout the whole world when white colonizers took over Asia, Africa, all the other continents. And with that came the belief of anti-blackness that was instilled upon all of these communities. Now, once those colonizations ended, you were left with this homogenized community where they don't know anyone who don't look like they're all white, all Asian, all South Asian, whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden you fast forward to having technology and Western media, because again, controlled by whiteness, is pushing out this message of that black communities are gangsters, do this, they do that. And then that media gets pushed out into the world in the form of movies and TV shows. And now you take this homogenized community who has learned anti-blackness through colonization and stuff like that, on top of the fact that it's then mixed with people who are learning about these races for the first time through fictionized television that is controlled by white media. And then you have this biased look. So when they meet black people for the first time, they're having to reconcile what they have been essentially brainwashed into thinking versus then trying to figure out what that means when they meet you and they're like, but you're not any of these things. Which is the reason why you get a lot of people from Asia who are having to go through that discovery, and Asian Americans who grew up with that and know that those are things that are essentially propaganda, mind washing, you know, to keep upholding this idea of, and instead of using the WS word, I'm going to say anti-blackness, because one is, you know,
hand in hand,
and they push this anti-blackness, then it's basically global propaganda. So then people are trying to, you know, come to those terms. And instead of just being hateful, they may just not understand. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I think that's like the short end of it.
Yeah. I mean, I have nothing to contribute. That was very concise. A lot of people are just conditioned to believe that black people are whatever the conditioner wants you to believe they are. Yep. And, you know, like my grandma, the only black people she had ever seen were American soldiers in Korea. And to her, they were all part of the same group. And then when she came to America, all she knew about black people was, like you said, what she had seen on TV, what people had told her. And so she was very distrusting of black people. And I was like, how many black people are just like everybody else? Like, you know, I go to school with black kids, like, you know, and she was just like, oh no, you know, they're very dangerous. I'm like, they're not. This is just what people wanted you to believe. But, you know, what else did she know? You know what I mean? She's just this, like, you know, country girl from, you know, uneducated, and is told by everybody in power what to believe. You know, my God is better. My people are better. My guns are better. You know, so she's like, okay, well, all of these things are better. So I better side with the better side.
Yep. Start winning. But the problem is our communities are divided. For Asian Americans and for African Americans, we probably have one of the worst relationships between any community.
Well, I bet you a lot of Asian Americans too don't, in my experience, don't even realize that if it wasn't for the civil rights movement, there would not be 22 million Asian Americans in this country.
Thank you. What I have been trying to teach the Asian community is like, friends, do you understand that your success, your prosperity, your civil rights that you enjoy right now was paid for with black blood?
Yo, what's up, man? I don't know if you guys have seen this video of these two Asian men talking about the divide between the black community and the Asian community. It's pretty dope, man. These dudes are laying down knowledge. It's dope. I think one of the guys may be Korean, the other guy's maybe Filipino. Either way, they're both Asian and they're spitting that real shit. The guy's like saying, yo, I don't know if the Asian community understands this, but we wouldn't be here, 22 million of us in America, if it weren't for the civil rights movement, the civil rights bill.
If it wasn't for the civil rights movement, there would not be 22 million Asian Americans in this country.
I'm like, yeah, son, it's real talk. Listen, first of all, foreigners in general, like me, I am not a foundational black American. I'm not. My parents came from Nigeria to here. If it were not for foundational black Americans, none of these immigrants would be able to be doing what they do. That's facts. My parents wouldn't be able to do what they do if it weren't for foundational black Americans. We have to understand that this is all history. Fuck your feelings. This is the real deal. And me growing up in America, being born in America, African Americans always have my back. But when they're on their backs, nobody picks them up. And I know there's going to be, I can't wait to see the comments. There's going to be some passive aggressive ass bitch here talking that shit. But this is all facts. All right. And I want to appreciate those two Asian dudes spitting that knowledge. And by the way, there's a lot of Asian people online spitting knowledge, real knowledge about the origins of our dealings with each other. People really waking up. And I really appreciate that because Asians and African Americans are so similar. Here's a nice little tidbit. Bruce Lee, when he was in San Francisco, you know who his first student was an African-American guy. It was an African-American. You could go watch Be Like Water on 30 by 30. His first student was an African-American.
No, we're good. We are good. No. I'm speaking for Black American experience. Every time we have tried to band with everyone, literally, the whites come in and offer you all something and you leave us in the dust. We tried it. Our own people sold us out. Let's start there. Well, I don't even know if that, because I feel like it went by tribe. It was a war, but let's not even start there. Let's just say our own people sold us out, right? Arabs conquered North Africa, the Spanish slave trade, which they had black people in. Then, when you look at the Native Americans, the 5 civilized tribes, most of them sold the blacks back to the whites because the blacks couldn't afford to prove that they were Native Americans. Every time we have tried to band with someone, y'all over. Figure it out yourself. I am not a racist person. I love everybody. But when it comes to success, I'm only worried about the Black American community right now due to the fact of if it was vice versa, everybody else would think of themselves.
But the problem is our communities are divided.
I bet you a lot of Asian Americans too don't, in my experience, don't even realize that if it wasn't for the civil rights movement, there would not be 22 million.
The problem is in division. This is the problem. Black Americans are only seen when we're beneficial to others. He said because of the civil rights movement, that's why 20 plus Asian people are here. But who was the sacrificial lamb during that civil rights movement? What other minority group was in the trenches with Black Americans while that was happening? Okay, and then on top of that, affirmative action, you know who benefited from that, even though it was meant for Black Americans and other marginalized groups? White women. And you see how they voted this past election. Other than that, if they're not benefiting from Black American people or Black American culture, they look at Black American people as less than. That's why they're always thriving and reaching for white proximity. This also applies to all the blacks that's not Black American. They think they better than Black Americans, but they're always cosplaying and benefiting from Black American culture. And these people are so disingenuous because they're only talking like this because of Trump talking about mass deporting Asians, Hispanics, Latinos, non-American citizens. That's the only reason this conversation came up, and that's why this is so disingenuous. It's funny now that they targeted, they want to give Black Americans credit. How come this conversation didn't happen 10 years ago, 11 years ago? The civil rights movement took what, place 60 years ago, and you now just talking about it? And since we're talking about this oppressor, this colonizer, the man, it's funny because he will hire a black American before the Asian man will, before the Arab man will. Matter of fact, they'll come into your community, your black community, take all your money, but they won't give you a chance. And then they judge you worse than the oppressor. Let one black American person do something wrong, then they label the whole community that way. That's the same tactics the white man use. Right? So the problem isn't division. The problem is respect. Y'all view black Americans as less than, and we're not having it. If we don't take that, accept that type of treatment from the white man, what makes you think that we're going to accept it from these middle groups? Are y'all that delusional? It's always good to show gratitude, but what does that translate into without respect?
Let's talk about intersectional history, something we don't talk nearly enough about, particularly at a moment in time when African Americans and Asian folks both found themselves on plantations in the Deep South during the 19th century. My name's EJ, and as I mentioned, I'm talking about history we don't talk nearly enough about, so let's get into it. Particularly in Louisiana, many folks that owned plantations and that were enslavers made large amounts of wealth, particularly owning sugarcane and cotton plantations. And so with the end of the Civil War and the emancipation of those that were being enslaved, they continued to look for ways in which they could exploit labor to continue making wealth off of these particular crops such as sugarcane and cotton. Now, you may remember learning this in school, where in the Caribbean, very similarly after the emancipation of those that were being enslaved, particularly Africans and their descendants, well, oftentimes those plantation owners look to find cheap sources of labor to continue to exploit this labor so they can continue to amass large amounts of wealth, particularly looking at places like Asia, places like China and India. And well, there was a few cases that this actually happened in the United States, and Louisiana is one of those places. I remember hearing years ago that there were Chinese immigrants living in the parish that my family was enslaved in Louisiana. I didn't really look into it at the time, but many years later, as I was doing my own family research, looking at the 1870 census, I found some very interesting information. As I was going through the census records, listed amongst many other black folks who were still living and working on these plantations post-emancipation, I found a number of individuals whose birthplaces were listed as China and who also were listed as laborers on these plantations near many African Americans. This is important to know that some plantation owners in Louisiana and parishes like Natchitoches, as well as some parishes in South Louisiana on the sugarcane plantations, look to exploit Asian labor, expecting it to be an easier form of labor to make them more money and wealth in lieu of the newly freed African Americans that were often still working on these many plantations. However, what they were not expecting is, just like African Americans, a lot of the Asian immigrants were also looking for better working conditions, and they were willing to leave plantations where they were able to find better working conditions or higher pay. It's important to remember this history in which Asian immigrants as well as African Americans continue to labor on the plantations throughout Louisiana post-emancipation of the enslaved African Americans. My name is EJ. Follow me for more Black history, culture, and content.
Now, that was a very, very powerful information, right? That one thing has stuck with me, and I've always known this, it's not my first time. If it were not for the efforts, the blood and the sweat of the black Americans, even me as an African, I could never go to America and work there. Let alone work, even go there. I would never be allowed. Me as an African. And sometimes I see people talking bad about black Americans. Africans saying they are more successful than black Americans in America. I'm left to think, what is success first? And if you use that, your terminology of success, on whose ground are you laying it on? Are you not laying it on a ground that was made for you by other people, by their blood, by their sweat, right? And here's where we have the distinction. And here's where the distinction is also important. The distinction between black Americans, Americans who are black, and foundational black Americans. The foundational black Americans are Americans who went there just by one means, slavery. The people, the first generation who went there, the people who plowed, the people who took care of the cotton and the sugarcane and the tobacco, right? Those are the FBA with whom their blood is why black people can go there and work. Is why Asians can go to America and work, right? So those people whom I hear talk, black are not rich, they are full of this. We may be having our problems as black people in America. I've never been to US, but I just hear of news. I have some friends who are black Americans. Even just with the information that I have about them, I can tell you that it is not easy for black Americans in America, right? We Africans, we are here in Africa, we hear of the US dollar, we want to go there and work and get the US dollar. I'm telling you, the US dollar is strong here, but the life there is really hard. The police brutality. Anytime you are on the road driving your car, you are always, it's like you are gambling your life with someone who is supposed to protect you. A guard with whom is called a policeman. Likeliness of you being stood and a white person being stood is almost 80%. If you are going to the same direction and you are black and they are white, 80% is that you will be stood, and almost 100% they won't be stood. And if you're stood, they'll likely look for a problem for you. If you're lucky, you'll go back home alive with a little bit of fine. If you're unlucky, then the worst will happen, right? Even though the foundational black Americans went to America and they were enslaved, back in Africa, we were colonized. We were colonized by the British. We were colonized by the Germans. We were colonized by the Portuguese. We were colonized by the Spanish. We were colonized. We were colonized in Africa. And the colonizer did not just colonize Africa. He went ahead and colonized countries such as Korea, countries such as Philippines, countries such as China. Yeah, they were colonized by the same man who was colonizing Africans, right? And also, the same person who was enslaving the foundational black Americans now, the same individual doing all these tasks by himself. And so, we get to America. I come from Africa. Another friend comes from Far East Asia. We go to America. We meet black Americans. We start fighting them. We start hating on them. We are forgetting that this person has gone through the same struggle that we faced once we left back home, right? You see, bad memories, not bad, but painful moments are always easy are always memorable, very, very memorable, and they are permanent. You will remember eating lemons with your friend, but it is likely that you will forget eating pizzas, whatever sweet thing. I'll use pizza. You won't forget eating pizza, but you'll remember eating ugali and salt. You'll remember eating lemons for breakfast. But this shows us that we are always reminded of difficult times, and difficult times brings us more closer to one another than the good times. Yes. So this is my call. My call is for the reconciliation. Reconciliation of the black Americans, the Africans, the Asians, and any other immigrant that suffered in the hands of colonialism and in the hands of the slavery. We share the same challenge, and through these shared challenges, we should find togetherness. Yes. This is EFK Original Documentaries. I hope you like what I do. If you like, kindly subscribe. It helps me a lot bring you good content. Subscribe and see you in the next one. And stay positive. Africa is really sunny, by the way. It's really, really sunny.